morning and welcome everybody one more time to Encounter. My name is Dirk, preaching pastor here at Encounter Church. Got a lot of questions recently over the last month or so, asking for an update on this REACH campaign that we wrapped up a couple of months ago. Remember, the REACH campaign is about reaching new people with the message of Jesus Christ by renovating this auditorium space, the lighting, especially our video components, so we can really broadcast and really get that message of Jesus out as far and widely as possible. So I want to kind of give you an update on that and say, so we're pulling in the contractors, we're pulling in the paint color changes and everything, and it looks like maybe end of January, beginning of February, you're going to start to see a lot of these changes take place. I would love to chat with you a little bit more about that at an appropriate time to share just specifically what it's all about. But for right now, this morning, we're going to jump into the message series that we've been working through, introduced last week, called Addition by Subtraction. We're talking about ways that we can actually enhance and add to our lives, especially our spiritual lives, by removing some things out. As counterintuitive as that seems. So last week we did that with our time. We said that your time is limited, and it might be an opportunity now to limit what you do with your time, because in the scope of God, in the scope of eternity, our lives are so very short. We want to do everything that we can to steward that time, to use that time as best as we possibly can. Today we're going to apply that message, apply that same concept onto our financial lives, onto our money. And I know as soon as I say that, right, it gets weird. It gets awkward. I mean, you're in church, and I work for the church, and this whole thing, and you're thinking this is going to be kind of one of those things. I want to promise you, up front, we're not going to pass the buckets around again. We're not introducing a new campaign. We're not doing any of that stuff here. In fact, I want to kind of start out from the general starting point with an invitation. If you're skeptical about anything that we talk about here this morning, that's okay. We're not asking you to check that skepticism at the door. Bring it right on in here. But we want to start off from the same point this morning to simply say that God doesn't need anything out of you. God doesn't depend on any one of us for really anything. And I would add to that and say with as much humility as I can convey, to simply say or suggest that if you come in with this idea, with this preconceived mindset that God does need something from you, or God is trying to get something out of you, that the problem there isn't necessarily the church or your bad church experience in the past, if you have one. The problem there is a theological one. Because your view or your understanding of God isn't nearly as big as it should be. Because if God is God, by definition, creating everything and owning everything as whole, not just world, but universe, there's no possible way that I or you or you or you or any of us could possibly give anything or have anything to offer back to God, because it's all His in the first place. So the starting place that we want to go from this morning before we jump into the Bible story is one to say, God isn't trying to get anything out of you. No. But He wants everything for you. What follows this morning isn't to grab, to take, but it's pouring back and investing in. It's this weird kind of addition by subtraction. We're going to hear a story this morning about an owner and about a steward manager. And the story is a weird one. Okay, in fact, in the 4th century AD, so a little while ago, when the Jesus movement was really taking off, and now it wasn't just an isolated thing in Jerusalem or here and there in the Middle East somewhere, but it was really starting to get global notoriety throughout the Roman Empire. In fact, 4th century, this story this morning was used as evidence that Jesus was in fact corrupting the Greek and Roman people, that He was teaching them to be thieves. And Jesus said, this is red letter stuff. So I hope you're well, I want to read that story. I mean, that sounds pretty interesting. The story that makes Jesus out to be corrupting the youth. Okay, this is the story. It comes to Luke chapter 16. You can follow along in the Bible, or blue glow on your faces from your phone. You're also following on the line. That we love that. But the words are going to be on the screen behind me as well. Start off in Luke 16 in verse 1. Jesus told His disciples this story. He said, Now, there's a rich man. Now, a rich man is not the bad guy in the story. So, like, preconceived notions, like, he's actually the good guy in the story. Okay, there's a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. All right, so the manager, sometimes we call that a steward. The manager is just kind of like the accountant of that. The stuff isn't his, but he's keeping track of it on behalf of the rich guy, on behalf of the owner. And what happens is that he's kind of like, the owner is going about his day, and these people in the villages, small towns, keep coming up to him, and they're like, hey, I don't know, I saw your manager driving a Lambo around, right? Like, I mean, that's just, I know you're not paying him that much. Like, it just seems like the way he's spending really your money, it doesn't seem like it aligns with your character. So there's something going on here that I just thought you should know about. And enough people told the owner this now that he decides, oh man, that's it. I mean, good help is hard to find, and this is definitely a case of that. Something has to be done. So in verse 2, so the rich guy, the owner, calls him, that's the manager, steward, in, and asks him, hey, what's this I hear about you? Give an account of your management. No, wait, because you cannot be manager any longer. He fires him. Except he doesn't. He fires him, but he does it so discreetly that he doesn't tell everybody about it. He just kind of like lets him go. Which is really important to what happens next in the story, that all of us know two things. First of all, he's fired, but nobody knows it yet. He still has the accounting, the books in his possession. So he's going to go home, and the owner thinks he's going to grab the books, maybe like close a few loose ends, whatever he's got to do to end well, and turn them back into the owner, and then officially be done with his employment there and move on. Okay, that's the first thing. There's this important little gap in between being fired and like everybody knows that he's no longer in charge of the master's estate. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is it is wildly generous of the part of the rich guy, the owner in this situation, not to have him in handcuffs by this point. All right, I'm not the wealthy owner guy, whatever, but I'm thinking if somebody did this to me, my call wouldn't be to him to bring him in, right? If I find out that kind of like embezzlement is going on, that kind of activity is going on, my call isn't necessarily to him first, it's to the cops. And when he shows up, he leaves in handcuffs. You know what I'm saying? That's justice. All right? I mean, that's what you would expect out of the story. If the guy has been ripping off his boss for this long, the owner for this long, then it just seems to make sense to throw the book at him. But that's not what happens. And I think it shows us something really important in the heart of the owner. And I think the manager realizes that. And I think that, too, is going to be important for the conclusion of the story. Okay, this is what happens next. The guy, he finds that he can't be manager any longer. So the manager, what am I going to do? Comes up with this. He says to himself, verse 3, what shall I do now? What am I going to do now? My manager is taking away my job. Okay, friend, he's not taking away your job. He took away your job. Like, you're fired, all right? But yet, you're not in jail right now. So, consider yourself #blessed. Okay, I'm not strong enough. He goes, I'm not strong enough to dig. There's probably an accountant's joke in there right now, but I'm afraid about that. Okay, I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. He's got a plan. Now, when he says, welcome me into their houses, he's not just talking about camaraderie and friendship. He's a manager. He's a household manager. A lot of the businesses, in fact, basically all the businesses were household, like farm businesses, you could say. I mean, it was a trade, it was a blacksmith, it was like whatever. It was what they did as a household. And so when he's talking about being welcomed back into somebody else's house, what he's talking about is like, I want to have a job. Again, I want somebody to hire me in to manage their household business just like I managed this guy's household business. He goes, I've got it. With the little time that I have before word gets out that I'm no longer employed here, I know what I'm going to do. And he hatches this plan. This is what it is. Continuing on, verse 5. And so he called in each one of his master's debtors, everybody that owes his boss money. And he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? It's like, you're the accountant. I mean, right? Like, he should know. Okay, 900 gallons of olive oil. That is a lot of olive oil. Okay, he replied, the manager told him, take your bill, sit down, and make it 450. He just wrote down 450 gallons of olive oil. All right, just by like comparison measures, because it's like, I don't know, a lot of olive oil, and that's a lot of, like, what does this stuff even mean? Like, I've got no idea. Okay, the real world, today's equivalent value on some of this, just trying to crunch a few numbers here, and figuring out like days, years' wages and how much it costs and kind of things. Very, very rough estimate. You can see that the manager just took his bill, and his bill was roughly $1 million in olive oil. And he goes, you know what? Go ahead and make it $500,000. Have a good day. Oh, I'm having a good day. No. The guy didn't walk out, the debtor in that situation, he didn't walk out of the room, right? He floated out of the room because he is so excited. He basically just won the lottery. What's probably happening is that the owner is the owner not just of like the managers, the things that the manager is managing. No, the owner probably owns like a huge amount of land all around this village. And all of these guys are like leasing farms from him. Right? And they promise a cut on all of the sales or all of the produce that the farms create. And I don't know if somehow they got upside down or if this is just like the natural expense of the thing or like whatever, but he owes $1 million. And it's like, he's got plans to pay it off. Maybe he's in a good place, maybe not. Either way, he just made $500,000. Like, that's sweet, right? Like, you get the idea. He made $500,000 because this turkey stole it from the owner, right? The boss. If you're wondering if this is a possibility when you go to negotiate your mortgage, it isn't. It's theft, right? It's illegal. You're not going to see this happen. But anyway, the manager, though, he's got a plan. There's a reason why we're still talking about this story 2,000 years later. All right, he's got a plan behind this. Make it 450, write down $500,000. Verse 7, then he asked the second guy, right, how much do you owe? And he goes, oh man, I'm in deep. I owe 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. And so the manager told him, he goes, take your bill of 1,000 bushels of wheat and make it 800. Again, he writes down 200 bushels of wheat. It's a different amount. It's a different thing. The value behind it is the same. Again, he says, my boss, on behalf of my boss, we forgive you $500,000. And again, the guy is so thrilled and he's so excited. He doesn't walk out of that room. He kind of floats on cloud, right? He is so excited about what is just happening. And we don't hear any more people, but it did say earlier that he took each one of his master's debtors and he writes down all of these expenses. Maybe it was $500,000 across the board for every single person. I mean, now at this point, keep in mind, this is not a big city. This is not like Kentwood where I live. There's a population of 56,000 people. Stuff happens that I don't hear about all the time. Grand Rapids metro area is like 1 million people. Stuff happens all the time. This is a city of 100 people. All right, when a bunch of people are just making $500,000, I mean, there is so much enthusiasm in the village and there is so much excitement going on. You know that they're breaking out in song. You know that they're dancing about this whole thing. Holy cow, is this guy generous? Except it was all stolen, wasn't it? All right? It was illegal. But yet now there's a party going on. And the music is pumping and people are dancing and they've got the fattened calf on the spit, going around with the apple in its mouth, whatever it is. Wheat, if you're vegan, they're so excited. And the boss, right? The owner, the master, the owner, the guy who has him, he comes in. And he finds out what's going on. Now, before we go to the next line, how would you react? Hey, guys, what's the party all about? What's the party? The party's for you. because you're so generous. You directed, or maybe the manager, he got you to write down all these debts. The party is in your honor. Oh, no, you're mistaken, right? I didn't do that. I fired him. No, turn on the music. Everybody, you all owe me that money. I didn't forgive any of your debts. No, that was all illegal. You still owe it to me. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you at work. The owner thinks about it for just a second, contemplates his next move. What is he going to do next? And in verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted, and I love he acted shrewdly. It violates everything I would have instinctively gone in, right? The manager just totally ripped off his boss, leveraged this generosity that the boss has shown him by not escorting him out in handcuffs like he should have, clearly, right? But he takes that little bit of generosity that he showed him, and he does this in return. He just loses his boss all of this money. And then when his boss shows up to the party, has him turn down the music, what are we celebrating? It's you, boss. We're celebrating you. He doesn't lead the manager away in handcuffs like I would have wanted to, or maybe you would have wanted to. No, instead he goes up and he high fives them. And you got me. You got me. Because I know now that the sentiment of this entire village is going to turn against me, or whatever the case it is. He's like, you put me between a rock and a hard place here, and I respect that. That's the end of the story that Jesus tells. And I'm thinking, what in the world was that about? I get why in the 4th century they're like, Jesus, I don't know about this guy. I think he's encouraging his followers to act corruptedly and really just steal from the people that they're working for. I don't know about this whole thing. And so Jesus wants to clarify everything. He goes, okay, this is what's going on. It's a parable. This is a made-up story that Jesus made up in order to drive home the spiritual truth. And Jesus goes, listen, I don't want you to miss it, so I'm just going to go ahead and just as plain as day tell you exactly what I mean. In the very next line, he starts off in verse 8. He goes, for the people of this world, now he's explaining the parable, the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than they are with the people of the light. That was about as clear as mud. So in verse 9, and he can see the slack-jawed look of the disciples, I didn't get that at all. I have no idea what you're talking about. And he goes, I tell you, Jesus, I tell you the point, use worldly wealth to gain friends so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed to eternal dwellings. Isn't that an interesting point that Jesus is making? Jesus, the Son of God, is saying, listen, I know how this stuff works because I'm the Word spoken at creation, right? Because everything was created through me. Nothing was created apart from me that has been made. I know creation. I know stuff. I know money. I know wealth. And Jesus says, I know the severe power of wealth. And he goes, one of the things that I noticed is people who are really, really good with money, it's going to sound like I'm coming down on bankers and investors, but I'm not, brokers, but I'm not at all. I'm just using them as an example. One of the things that I've noticed is that when real estate dips, right? And things get really bad, or the market just collapses, or when there's this huge loss of value, it's the bankers, the brokers, the investors that jump into that thing and buy low. And then when it inevitably rises up again, they make a ton of money. And Jesus is I'm not coming down on them right now. This isn't, remember, the rich guy isn't the bad guy in the story here, but he goes, I've noticed that they do that. They leverage what's down when it's low in order to maximize their wealth, in order to create this value over here. Good brokers, good investors, good real estate dudes, they know how to do that. And she's I'm not coming down to that. The reason why I'm sharing this story for Jesus to share it with all of us is we know that same thing is true, except for they're way better at employing that than we are. And he's not saying that in order to okay, this turns into this financial scheme about how to get rich quick, and you got to invest at the sell low, or no, buy low, sell high. That's why I don't do this sort of thing. Got to get that right. No, he's not saying that. Jesus is going, no, it's even more important than that. right? Because he called them the people of light, because for the Jesus followers, he goes, you have this opportunity to take wealth. And he goes, I know the incredible value that wealth has, the power that wealth has. There's a way that you can take money, you can take finance, you can take wealth, and you can translate that into something with this lasting, eternal value. Isn't that unbelievable? So, for example, when you hear this story of somebody around the world who doesn't have enough food to eat, so Jesus is like, this is the crazy thing about wealth. And he goes, I know how it works because I made it. You can take wealth and you can somehow through the magic of commerce, turn that into food for somebody to eat halfway around the world. Wow. I mean, that's significant. And Jesus goes no, not only that, but right here in Grand Rapids, when there's a food insecure family, you can take money, you can take wealth, and you can translate that into food to feed an insecure family. You can do that with clothes to clad the naked or underclothed. You can do that with so many other things. That's the power of wealth. You can use that to somehow turn it into a net, a mosquito net that provides a shelter around a small kid so that he doesn't get malaria, and that $5 saves a life. And Jesus is like, wow, what an incredible value. You get that principle of you have this opportunity, you can leverage that and turn it into something way bigger than just more money. You could turn it into saved life. And then he goes down to the eternal dwellings. He goes, this is where it gets real, friends, and especially for the church. He goes, there's a way Jesus is offering that you can take wealth, you can take money, and you can turn it into something. Turn it into a radio program, or turn it into a missionary, or turn it into a new church start, or turn it into a new ministry right here in Grand Rapids. You can turn it into something that actually tells more people about Jesus and changes their eternity. Are you with me? Do you know what I'm talking? This is how significant this is. I got nothing out of that. So I just assume that you need an example. Just imagine dying, meeting God. We talked about that last week. Going to heaven, and you're walking around, and it's not like the clouds and harps and stuff like that. That's not in the Bible, right? God made a creation once. It's going to at least be as good as this one. So imagine walking around, and someone comes up to you and says, John? Is that you? Susan? Is that you? And you're like, yeah, it's me. I don't think we've ever met before. I don't think we know each other. And the guy goes, no, we don't. We've never met before. But do you remember stuffing $5 a month and putting it in an envelope and sending it to that Christian Miracle Network deal? Where they promise to feed and educate a kid? Every month, if you sent the money in, they take care of him all the way through 18. Do you remember doing that? Barely. I mean, the sticker was on my fridge for a little while. It was not much money. I did not think of it. And he goes, no, I know that too. We're in heaven now. I have some perspective. But that was me. That little kid. He grew up to be me. And then the point sinks in, right? Of just exactly what Jesus is saying. It's, wait a second. That $5 turned into, yeah, I'm here because of you. Now, isn't that amazing? And worth $5, right? And that's what Jesus is saying. That's the power of that leverage. Just saying, I know just what money is capable of. Sure, it can turn into more money, but even more than that, it could turn into somebody's eternal destination, changing. Wow. All right, but what about here? As we talk about encountering the ministries around here, and as I started off, this is why I'm so bewildered / excited about this, just what we're up to here at Encounter Church. Because one thing that I've noticed, and I'll just kind of stick with me here, this is Dirk's musings, but I get the microphone, you're not going anywhere. We were in a school cafeteria, for a while, set up, tear down. It was awful. I still have scars from the trailer, but literally, it hit my head. And we got to tell 100 people a week about Jesus, and that was awesome. I'm blessed to be able to do that. But I know there's a weird, funny thing happened that we moved in here. We got to tell so many more people about Jesus. We got to tell another 100 people about Jesus every single weekend. That message got out, and a lot of you sacrificed massively to make that happen. Oh, my word. But that's such incredible news. And then when we started renovating the upper lobby space, and I don't know how this works, like kids space and cafe space, entranceway, have something nice to welcome people into. People are inviting their friends. You gotta come to this church. You gotta check out. You gotta hear about Jesus right here. You gotta experience God here. And then a funny thing happened. A couple of hundred more people start to hear about Jesus every single weekend around here. So I don't understand, and I don't totally get how we're gonna paint things around here. And we're gonna do new lighting and new audio. Whatever system. But I don't care about any of that. And chances are, even if you already gave to this thing, remember, the campaign is closed. This is not a pitch. But even if you gave to this thing, you probably don't even care about that stuff either. But what you care about is that big sign on the wall in the lobby that says that we bring people far from God to new life in Christ. And that's what it's about. Because we're going to have another opportunity now as we broadcast it all over to say, this is the message, this is the hope of Jesus Christ who rose from the dead, defeated sin, defeated death on your behalf. Isn't that the most incredible use of wealth to change someone's eternal destination? Oh, I love that. The only problem, the only hiccup in this story is it wasn't the guy's money, right? It was all stolen. What about that, Jesus? And Jesus is like, yeah, I know, right? I wanted to tell the story that way because I wanted to kind of get the landscape right. It wasn't his money. And I think Jesus is looking back at now, as I read this story, he's like, Dirk, and it's not yours either. And it's not any of ours. Because none of us are anything, but we're managers. We're stewards. And in the story, what made that manager, that steward, so incredibly, and the word that Jesus uses is shrewd, is crafty, clever, cunning. What made him so shrewd in the story is that he looked back on the heart of his owner, of his master, the guy who's rightfully was the claimer and owner of everything in and around that village. And he looked back on that owner and said, if there's one thing that I know about my master is that he has a generous heart. He didn't condemn me. He didn't lead me into handcuffs out of here when he found out who I am and the mistakes that I have made. No. Instead, he did this incredibly generous and respectful thing. If there's one thing that I know about my manager, about my owner, is that his heart is generous. And I'm going to take all of my chips and I'm going to take everything that I have and every amount of leverage and any amount of influence that I have, and I'm going to push it all in, and I'm going to bank on the generosity of my manager. And Jesus is saying, you can bank on the generosity of your master, of your king. You can bank on that all day long. You think God at the end of the day is going to meet you in heaven and hear you say you gave everything away to clothe the naked, to feed the hungry, to tell some kid or some family about Jesus? Do you think God is going to be upset about that? My goodness. God is going to say, what have you done with all of my resources, with all of my wealth? And then he's not going to lead you away in handcuffs. He's going to high five you. He's going to commend you like he did with the guy in this story, because you can bank on the generosity of God every single time. But there's something that stands in the way, and it's us. As much as we want that to be the case, as much as we want to leverage everything to change somebody's eternal, and I think we do. My observation around here is we so do. The Christians around here, the followers of Jesus around here, you all, I've heard so many of your stories, you absolutely do want that. But the thing that stands in your way is that isn't the only thing competing for your financial resources. There's also everything else. There's also Visa, and there's also MasterCard and Bank of America. And I'm not coming down on any of those things, but I'm simply saying that's the reality. There's all this stuff. There's vacation, there's house, there's car. There's so much stuff competing all the time. So Jesus, when he's thinking about how am I going to wrap this thing up? How am I going to really drive home how important this is, the opportunity ahead that you all know now, the eternal significance ahead. But then on the other side here, why don't we? What's keeping us? And Jesus goes, I guess here it is in verse 13. And then he wraps up the parable, the story. Before moving on, he says this is what you have to know. He goes, by the way, no one can serve two masters. You ever have two bosses? divorced parents, a mom and a dad you stayed with, separate homes. No one can serve two masters. Either you're going to hate one and love the other. You know, my mom has all the rules, and dad lets me stay up late and doesn't care what I watch on TV. Or you're going to be devoted to one and despise the other. I love the boss on the job site because she gets it. She understands. She's here day in and day out. She knows what it takes to get this project wrapped up and finished so we can move on. The corporate guy, he doesn't know anything. He's totally disconnected. I love one and I hate the other. I'm just devoted to one. I despise the other one. Jesus is like, you can't serve two masters. And these words that just ring, and the last thing that he says is Jesus says, you cannot serve both God and he doesn't say money, or he doesn't say the devil. He doesn't say you can't serve good and evil. He says you can't serve God and money, the chief competitor to leveraging that wealth and doing with it something with eternal significance behind the whole thing. It isn't any more than the fact is, you can't serve Christ if you're already a slave to like Bank of America. Or you can't serve Christ if you're already a slave to whoever it is that offered you the student loans. Like, got quiet in there, I know. But like, listen, I know, it's coming. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, if you already have pledged your financial life to someone, like you're not free enough to serve Christ. And so, like, the takeaway, leave you with, it's on the program, it's going to be on the word. Like, if it's possible to potentially, like, live, like, life is more when you live with less, because when you, like, scale that back some, like, create this spot where you can catch your breath, and there's, like, that opportunity, that financial opportunity, that margin. We introduced the word with time last week. We do it with money this week. But, like, that margin, that bubble, that space that you can use now to serve, to be free to serve the cause of Christ. Because if you're a slave to debt, and this is just like how it is, a lot of you just know this because you're already a slave. And you're like, you just named my reality already. And some of you, it's not too late. You can still, right? But you need to hear, if you're already a slave to debt, you're not free to serve Christ because, like, you can't serve them both. You can't have two masters, and it, like, robs us. I think of what Jesus had in store for us when he called us to serve him. Because, like, on an emotional level, earlier on in the Sermon on the Mountain, Jesus is like, oh, by the way, don't worry. Because who by worrying can add a single hour to their life? See, the lilies of the field, right? They don't do anything. They don't sow or reap. They don't store away. But yet, your Heavenly Father, like, look how beautiful they are. And the birds of the air. And, like, look how God feeds them and takes care. And you're like, yeah, birds have not been called at work by a debt collector. Okay, that's why they're not worrying. I worry. And it's like we've just been robbed of that emotional security that Jesus wanted to offer us. And then on the other side, there's like 100 times, literally 100 times in the New Testament where it's one word in the New Testament language, Greek, one another. Love one another, serve one another, carry one another's burdens. And it was, in fact, in our mission statement, worship, connect, grow, worship God, connect with one another. I had each other, and then it was somebody else who came along and said, we should do one another, because it's used 100 times in the New Testament to refer to one another, to other people. Love, serve, carry the burdens of one another. And you think, like, I am not free to love one another, to serve one another, to carry anybody else's burdens, because mine are way too heavy already. And it's like even the serve then with our time, with our money, has been taken away because it's already pledged too much. And Jesus is like, didn't I tell you you can't serve two masters? Didn't I tell you life is more when you simply back it off and live with less? And when you do that, and it feels like going without, it feels like the most anti-American thing you could ever possibly do. But you can bank. You can bank on the owner. You can bank on the generosity of the master. You can bank on the generosity of God to provide every single time. I heard a story that I wanted to share with you. I heard the story probably 7 years ago, and it just was seared into my memory, and I will not forget it. For him, it was June 29, 2007, I believe it was. Gary Hogg was serving as the vice president at Denver Seminary, pretty big, well-known seminary at the time. The president of the seminary had recently stepped down, and there was an opening. And when there's an opening in a position like that, often people start to look at the successful people around that president, and they're looking at Gary as a vice president already and saying, you know the organization, you know how we operate, you know the posture, you know the vision and mission. Like you, Gary, you can take this thing and you can run with it. And so Gary goes out on this retreat, and he starts considering, like, what is it that God is going to have me do? Is this the position that I should take? Is this the opportunity to step aside and let somebody else in? And God blew his mind. Because God told him something that is not normative for the Christian life. It is not something that everybody has to do, but God did tell Gary, when you step away and you've got a wife, Jenny, and 2 kids, Sammy and Sophie, little kids at home, Gary, I not only don't want you to work here anymore, but step aside completely. I want you to take everything that you had. I want you to take roughly $225,000 in your retirement savings and all of your other savings, and I want you to give every last penny away to the organizations that I'm going to tell you about. And Gary said, that's crazy. I know, it is. And that's what everybody will say. But he did. Okay, he did. And I heard this story a few years later, and he goes, I was asking him, how did it go? And he said, God told the most amazing stories with that money, and I will be eternally grateful with it. But it was not easy. He said, what happened is that, what I didn't put in the blog is, a few years after everything was cleared out and gone, and it was starting new, starting over, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, early stage, totally preventable. Thank God her life was spared, and they basically knew that from the get-go, except for the fact that they had no money because everything was gone. And so they took all of their bills, they took everything that they had, and they spread it out in the coffee table in the living room. And Gary called his wife Jenny over. They opened up all the letters, added up all the bills. It came to just shy of $10,000, their share of the treatment. And they called over Sophie, little Sophie, and her older brother Sammy. And he said, kids, we're going to pray over this because we don't know how this is going to get paid for. We got to pay for it. God told us to give it away, so we were faithful, banking on the generosity of God, and they prayed. Within a month after praying, you know where this story is going, letters started coming. He never asked for any money from anybody. Few people even knew that she had early stage breast cancer, but people started sending them money because they heard what he did with it. As words started getting out and as the checks started pouring in, they started adding it up, and it came to exactly, precisely on the number, $10,000, paying off every single one of the expenses. That's not the important part of the story. The important part of the story is that it was a family affair. It was a family decision through and through, and praying over the expenses, praying over the mountain was a family affair. And so little 9-year-old Sophie in pigtails comes over, here's what's happening. And Gary now and Jenny now are just in tears as they're saying, kids, God provided. God moved the mountain. God gave us not much more, but everything that we needed. God did this. And Sophie running around, just elated. He goes, that was the point of the story. The point of the story is that now my 9-year-old Sophie is running around, and he goes, that's what made everything worth it, because she's singing and she's dancing in the living room and she's saying things like, God is real. God is real. We can trust him because God is real. And he goes, that was worth $250,000. That was worth everything that I have, because my daughter will never forget, friends, that you can bank on the generosity of God every single time. Just stand with me and let's pray together. Dear God, we hold so much back. God, we look for fulfillment in the places of this world that aren't bad. It's not bad, God, but it's not good either. It's not everything. God, I ask that our time together today provides clarity for us to see just what's not important, but what's everything. God, if that means that we scale back this year, if that means that we live on less, God, so be it. But God, every time that we find ourselves experiencing this place of being in denial or being without, or looking over across the fence or on social and saying, if only I had, if only we could do. God, remind us in those moments in a way that only your Holy Spirit can, that you are enough and that we can trust you and that you are real. And God, that we can bank on your eternal generosity every single time. Jesus, it's in your name. Amen.